don't think anybody can claim to be fully neutral or simply objective. I think everybody, whether they're self-conscious about it or not, has some kind of political point of view and interest. So I think, just to start out, I think each of us kind of believe that we're the centre of the universe. That's alright, everything revolves around us. And I think the way history is taught as well, sometimes each individual nation state, the universe kind of revolves around it, or history happens around it. And I think Irish history is very true to that, because we have a very contested history, and people have a lot of interest in Irish history. I would say there's a lot more interest in Irish history going back over hundreds of years than I would have found in the United States in terms of people's political horizons. And that can be a good thing, but it can also be a very, very challenging thing, as we know. So I also think that Irish history can often be taught in a very, very narrow and constricted way, so that the dominant narratives tend to dominate when you go to school, even in the university level education, and obviously in the mainstream press. So I think that Ireland's century, or decade of centenaries, or its decade of revolution, as I would call it, I don't think it can be understood without reference to what was happening in the rest of the world at the same time. And I think that that's really, really important. And I think it actually enhances our understanding of Irish political history, not just political history, economic and social and cultural as well, when we look at it from that point of view. So I'm going to argue that there was a revolution in Ireland, and I'm going to argue that there was a counter-revolution that went along with that. There was a political revolution here, but there was no social or economic revolution. There was the ingredients for that kind of revolution, but it didn't develop in that direction. So I'd like to talk a wee bit about why I think that was the case, but also look at why I think that the ingredients were there for a different kind of revolution to develop, because it's often dismissed, and history was inevitable, and the outcome was determined somewhat from the start, based on what the actual how things developed in 1923. So I want to start with 1913 and the Dublin lockout, because I think it's still one of the most important events in Irish history. When thousands of Irish workers battled over the future of Ireland with 400 employers in Dublin. And James Connolly at the time described it as much more than a labour struggle. He viewed it, and I think many of the participants viewed it, especially those that were in the leadership, but I would think way beyond that this was really a struggle over what kind of Ireland there was going to be, or the future of Ireland, or the new Ireland that was being discussed. Would it be ruled by workers, or would it be ruled by employers? And that's the kind of language that Connolly used during the actual Dublin lockout of 1913. And why did he talk about it in those terms? Well, because in that year, Home Rule looked very, very inevitable. It looked like it was going to be passed, and that there would be a change in the political landscape. So that would have an impact on political parties, on the way that people presented themselves. Connolly was very, very optimistic that this meant that the labour movement would be able to move in as the opposition to employer parties, whether they were green or orange or nationalist or unionist, and it would be more difficult for the mainstream traditions to present themselves as popular defenders of working class interests. Obviously that didn't come to play out, but that was Connolly and other people's perspective back in 1913, which led them to believe that this was a battle, that the 1913 struggle was really that kind of battle. So what would a Home Rule Ireland look like? Would it be a Home Rule that was dominated by bosses and employers, or would it be a New Ireland or Home Rule Ireland where workers had established their rights, or challenged exploitation? I think from the point of view of employers and elites, and William Martin Murphy, who led up the employer side of the lockout, they believed that they would be in charge, that wealthy people would continue to be in charge in a home rule Ireland, and that was very much a shared view. So, there's more to say about 1913, I'll get into that, but I just want to look at Connolly a bit as well, because this is a lead-in really to talk about the influence of other ideas from elsewhere into Irish political events and political struggles. So as we know, well, it's not necessarily that widely known, Connolly was Scottish. He spent 7 years in the British Army, served those years here in Ireland. It was the way that he first came to visit. And he immigrated to the United States in 1903 with a mixture of poverty and the political challenges that existed in Ireland. And in the US in 1905, a new political labour organisation was formed called the Industrial Workers of the World. And they were widely known and are still known to this day as the Wobblies. I don't know if people are familiar with them, but it was founded by trade union militants, socialists and other kinds of radicals who become very, very frustrated with the Democratic Party, the Republican Party and the American Federation of Labour. That was the main umbrella labour organisation because of its kind of conservatism, its gradualism, its reluctance to organise workers of colour, and its reluctance to organise women as well. So this new organisation embodied the best spirits of the radical movement inside the United States, and it has a fascinating history of leading all sorts of brilliant struggles that are inspirational to this day for organisers and activists in the US. And the IWW, or the Wobblies, they set out to organise the unorganised. The way trade union organisation was conducted at that point, it was only workers in the crafts, so highly skilled workers that tended to be unionised. Unskilled workers tended to be treated as rabble and unfit for union organisation. So, and the strategies that they employed to unionise people and to change workplace conditions was heavily dependent on using the strike. So striking, surprise strikes, guerrilla strikes, but using the leverage of withholding your labour in order to win demands from your employers. But they also called in solidarity. They used solidarity very much effectively as well. So if one group of workers were on strike, it was the duty of other groups of workers to back them in a strike as well, so that you would have a kind of spread and movement of the class, in the sense of the working class coming out in support of each other. And the ultimate goal of the Wobblies was for a general strike, where workers would shut down the economy and then begin and start or seize control over the economy, workplaces, factories, the fields, and establish an industrial republic. That's what they called it. So it would be a socialist industrial republic where workers ran it. So this was the vision of the IWW. Now Connolly joined the IWW in 1905 and became an organiser of the IWW. So he comes back to Ireland in 1910, and not soon after he becomes an organiser of the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, along with Big Jim Martin, and he brings these ideas back with him. Now these ideas weren't just Connolly's. People like Larkin were also militant syndicalists, as people called them. That would have been the way that this type of trade unionism would have been described. And their goal, rather than, they called it an industrial republic, but in the Irish context they called it a workers' republic, which you could gather different meanings from. It would be a new society or a new Ireland that was ran by workers. It also spoke to their beliefs that Ireland should be independent from the British Empire. So it was on this basis that they were organising. So when you think about the Dublin Knockout, for Connolly and Larkin and many others, it wasn't just about the right to be in a union, it wasn't just about the right to strike, it wasn't just about the right to have a solidarity strike. They believed that an intense struggle could actually lead to a struggle for a workers' republic. And so this is what they meant by, this is what Connolly meant by, this is not just a typical labour battle. So they didn't have any predetermined view as to how this struggle was going to end up. They thought we'll engage, and we'll see what happens, and who knows what's going to come out of it on the other side. Now, I would say the vast majority of struggles that develop in the world, don't begin with people having fully fledged revolutionary consciousness. That it's very much people enter into struggles, not of their own choosing, and it can be over anything really. But it's through that struggle that the possibility of it becoming a revolution actually develops. And I think that's how they view the Dublin lockout. So the defeat of the Dublin lockout, I think, for Connolly and Larkin was very, very devastating, because they had the vision of its full possibility, that it could lead to a revolution and a workers' republic, a new Ireland. That didn't happen. The nationalist employers, again led by Murphy, were able to defeat the strike by essentially starving the Dublin working class into submission and forcing people to go back to work. So that meant that the nationalist Ireland that Murphy envisaged was very much one where workers and the poor very much knew their place, and that the right to profit and the right to private property would be sacrosanct. So that's, I think, the beginning of a decade of revolution. Now that's not necessarily the way everybody would look at it. I think that is trying to get inside the way of thinking of Connolly and other leading revolutionaries. And so that brings us up until 1914, obviously, because the strike actually went into that year. I think the First World War, as we know, ended the possibility for the time being of home rule being introduced in Ireland. And it really didn't seem likely in 1914 that revolution would not just be a possibility in Ireland, but that it would be something that would be erupting all across the globe as it came to be. Only in a couple of years' time we'd be seeing the whole existing order in Europe and beyond challenged by mass movements from below. I think it was very hard for Connolly to see that in 1914. I think it would have been very, very, very difficult for the vast majority of people to think that, given that people were pulled in behind the kind of patriotism of war and the excitement of war on one level, but also massive levels of kind of government propaganda in favour of war and so on. So Connolly in 1914 was arguing that, again, he had a very unique perspective on this. He was arguing well before everybody else that the outbreak of the war should be the opportunity for people to initiate revolutions, not just in Ireland but across the world. Many other socialist leaders didn't agree with that. They actually ended up supporting their own governments in what became a massive slaughter. And Connolly believed that a revolt in Ireland could actually help stimulate rebellion and revolution across the world. Now, Ireland, as we know, is a very, very small country, economically underdeveloped, apart from the northeast and a bit of manufacturing around Derry. So why did Connolly think this? And I think the way he viewed it was that the British Empire at the time was the strongest empire in the world. It was the most modern. It was viewed as the most powerful empire. But Ireland, because of its proximity to Britain, was very, very much viewed as part of the core of the British Empire. And if there was a rebellion at the very heart of the empire, this could have, this could encourage rebellion and revolution all across the entire empire, across the British Empire, but not just the British Empire, across all of the empires that were in existence at the time. And as we know, by 1914, the entire world had been carved up between the leading powers. There had been a mad rush, in the late 1890s and onwards, for all the imperial powers to kind of grab territories all over the world on the basis that they had the access to markets and raw materials. So that meant that we were in a period now where, socialists and Marxists were calling it imperialism, where you had huge empires competing with each other over dominance of the globe, economic dominance, but that economic dominance could very easily spill over into military conflict, or economic conflict could spill over into military conflict. And of course this is what plays out, unfortunately, with the eruption of the war. So Connolly, and others then understood that with the empire stretched by war, this would be a perfect opportunity to have a rebellion. I think for the British establishment at the time, the prospect of revolt in Ireland was terrifying, not just because of the idea of losing part of the empire, but because it would signal weakness to the other people they were, to the other parts of the empire that they were in control of, but also to Britain's competitors, whether it was Germany, Japan, or the United States. So on a whole number of levels, the British elites, British government, the British military were terrified of the possibility of rebellion inside Ireland. And as we know, 1916 is another date in the decade of centenaries. It's the year of the Irish Rising, and in many ways it was the first of many risings that would occur soon after it all across the world. It's been described as the only problem with it that it was premature, because it was the other rebellion in other parts of the world hadn't developed up enough where the Irish Revolution or Irish Rebellion wasn't left isolated. But Connolly actually believed that Europe was ripe for revolution in 1916. So Connolly wasn't going into 1916 thinking this is just a kind of narrow Irish affair about establishing an Irish Republic. Connolly's view was the same in 1916 as it had been in 1914, where he viewed that some kind of revolt in Ireland could set off a chain revolt all across the world. And so this is why he was eager for Ireland to strike a blow as soon as possible. He thought that it would lead to the overthrow not just of the British Empire, but of capitalism and imperialism, and it would encourage other people across the world to act in a similar way. And that's how he went into the Easter Rising. That doesn't speak to how everybody else who participated in Easter Rising thought about it. There was all sorts of ideas in it, in terms of what people thought they were aiming to achieve. But I think ultimately Connolly was absolutely right, because the 1916 Rising did help inspire revolts and rebellions all across Europe and within empires, and Europe was ripe for rebellion. That became very, very clear soon afterwards. In 1916 as well, I mean, it's an oddity in the sense that, you've got, if you think about the Russian Revolution, which I'm going to talk a wee bit about in a second, the Russian Revolution ends in the seizure of power, right, of government buildings. It's many months in the making. In a sense, the Irish revolt starts with the attempt, it starts with an insurrection that's defeated with an Easter week. But then that helps to spark a revolutionary process of mass radicalisation. So no matter what people kind of thought about the Easter Rising, it's clear that the military repression afterwards led many more people to become very sympathetic to the rebels and also the aims of the rebels. And so there was really a sea change in the way people viewed the British state in Ireland and their willingness to actually challenge it and fight for independence. And so it wasn't just the repression that followed 1916. I mean, there was many other things in play. I think people had experienced 2 years that was just eating up the youth of Europe, and more voices began to speak out about how disastrous the war actually was for people. The war also brought deprivation, in the sense that people had to get by with a lot less. There was less food, and it meant that there was also speed-ups at work, and an intensification of exploitation at work. So you've just got a series of things that kind of go together, and it's true this was developing in Ireland, but it wasn't simply an Irish phenomenon. This was happening anywhere there was anywhere the war was being conducted, where you had labour being marshalled for the war effort, huge profits for the arms industry, and it led to a mass radicalisation. Lenin, speaking about, talked a bit about the prospect, the impact that a rebellion in Ireland would have. And he talks about, he says it like this, he says, quote, "The struggle of the oppressed nations in Europe is a struggle capable of going all the way to insurrection and street fighting, capable of breaking down the iron discipline of the army and martial law. It will sharpen the revolutionary crisis in Europe to an infinitely greater degree than a much more developed rebellion in a remote colony. A blow delivered against the power of the English imperialist bourgeoisie by a rebellion in Ireland is 100 times more significant politically than a blow of equal force delivered in Asia or in Africa." So you see there, now this is before the Irish Rebellion. Lenin from Russia, and nobody really knew who Lenin was at the time. He wasn't super well known even in socialist circles. Can see how the tensions that are building up between subjugated nations and imperial powers can actually produce some of the first reactions to it. And he just sees that, if there was a rebellion in Asia somewhere, it's going to have less of an impact than one that develops in Ireland, because it's part of the core of the UK, of the British Empire. So that was very similar to Connolly's thinking. So you can begin to see that there's a layer of socialists across the world that are beginning to kind of grapple with the impact that the Great War is happening across the board. Not long after the Easter Rising, of course, the 1917 Russian Revolution erupts. And again, for many of the people who were involved in attempting to shape that revolution, they were taken by surprise. Because I think revolutions often take people by surprise, even if you've spent your life attempting to ignite one. The February Revolution, as we know, brought down the 400-year Romanov dynasty, which was as solid and strong as the British Empire, and overnight it was literally gone. The Tsar's power evaporated, and the aristocracy of Russia was more or less wiped out overnight. Again, that can only be understood if we look at like the impact that the war had on the entire Russian population in terms of the slaughter, the great loss of human beings, and the impoverishment of Russian people. That led people to take actions that they couldn't have imagined doing a year before, or even 2 years before, when there was a great push of support for the war effort. And then that's followed up then in October 1917 with a second Russian Revolution that doesn't just end Tsarist power, but also puts in place working class power. So Connolly's dead obviously at this point, but his vision of a workers' republic, or the industrial workers of the world's vision of an industrial republic, is put into practice in a massive country, Russia, where workers now have seized control of the economy, workers and peasants, and they're attempting to begin the process of creating a new kind of society with all sorts of massive difficulties and challenges along with it. And they have new institutions called Workers and Peasants Councils, where they're attempting to construct a new form of mass democracy. So this is all happening, and people are watching this all across Europe. And I think that the Russian Revolution then has a massive impact on developments in Ireland, on people who think of themselves as revolutionaries, on people who are eager for social change. Because not only are they seeing an empire overthrown by people from below, by ordinary people, they're also seeing now an alternative form of power, or an alternative form of democracy that says we don't need capitalism. We're actually going to try to have a society without profit. We're going to construct a new socialist society. And I think that the ideological impact of that is sometimes underestimated. Because I think that allowed people to kind of widen their horizons about what kind of society are we actually fighting for. And I think that the Russian Revolution had a big and very deep impact on Ireland, which I think is often overlooked or dismissed, because obviously the Ireland that was produced through a decade of revolution didn't look anything like the Russian society when there was a revolution. In February 1918, there was a 10,000 people packed into Mansion House in Dublin to celebrate the Russian Revolution. They marched through Dublin with red flags. There was a triumphalism about it. Many well-known Irish leaders, Maud Gonne, William O'Brien from the Labour movement, all participated in this. So even with that one shot, that's, I think, a significant event in Dublin. 10,000 people rallying for the Russian Revolution. The Irish Times at the time was worried enough that this is the way that they talked about the impact of the Russian Revolution in Ireland. This is a quote. They have invaded Ireland, and if the democracies do not keep their heads, they may extend to other countries of Europe. The infection in Ireland by the anarchy of Bolshevism is one of those phenomena which, though almost incredible to reason and experience, are made intelligible by accidents of fortune or human folly. So the Irish Times there is editorialising about, like, as crazy as it is, a lot of people are excited about the Bolshevik Revolution. And I think that that's true, because I think people were looking for some kind of alternative in 1918. The British Prime Minister, Lloyd George, he writes in 1918, and I think this gives you a real insight into the depth of worry from the leaders of the so-called democracies. He wrote, and this was the French leader at the time, he wrote, "The whole of Europe is filled with the spirit of revolution. There is a deep sense, not only of discontent, but also of anger and revolt amongst the workers. The whole existing order in its political, social and economic aspects is questioned by the mass of the population from one end of Europe to the other. Bolshevism is gaining ground everywhere." Now that's Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of England, of Britain. He was no supporter of Bolshevism. He actually wanted to see it crushed, and he would do everything in his power going forward to make that a reality. But I think that gives you a sense of, like, how upside down, in a sense, Europe was at the time. That the existing orders were being challenged, and there was a threat that the whole way that society was being organised was being challenged. So the social order was threatened everywhere. Now, for Lloyd George and the establishment, anything that challenges the way that society is organised is anarchy. So, that would be their justification for, defending the rule of law and so on. At the same time, the head of the British Army in Ireland, General Sir Henry Wilson, warned that a Bolshevik rising was likely in Ireland, and he went on to say that he had not been so nervous about the state of affairs in the British Empire since July 1914, and in many ways I'm far more anxious today than I've been in that fateful month. So he was describing the outbreak of war, the potential for a Bolshevik revolution in Ireland, on the same level as the outbreak of hostilities in 1914. I think it's true to say that wealthy farmers, industrialists, church leaders, along with the British Army and the British government, were absolutely terrified at this point with the potential of revolution in Ireland. And it was really the nightmare scenario that first emerged in 1913 with the Dublin lockout had now come back, I think, in a much more intense way, and it wasn't limited to Dublin anymore. And it was intensified because of the experience of the war, because of the experience of deprivations, and because of the experience of the reaction after 1916 to the rising as well. So that whole scenario, I think, had become more real and more realistic. I think that for the rulers here, there is a level of exaggeration maybe in terms of the actual level of Bolshevik organisation or Bolshevik threat. But I think it's more about the potential for large numbers of people to be moved by revolutionary ideas and to fight for something else. Now, as we know, most histories focus on in terms of rebellion against the British Empire, will focus on the War of Independence or the Anglo-Irish War, and that starts in 1919 on the opening day of the Dáil, the new government, the rebel government that is dominated now by Sinn Féin following the All-Ireland election. And the War of Independence is very, very effective because it makes Ireland ungovernable. There's over 500 or 600 police stations are deserted because of the threat of military violence, because they're being boycotted. And so the police and the British authority is driven out of all parts of Ireland. There's liberated zones, tax offices are burnt, the British authorities are unable to collect taxes. So there's a very, very effective guerrilla war, and obviously it's not just burning tax offices. There's people are being killed as part of this as well. This is all part of revolutionary violence. And it's threatening British rule in Ireland, and that is very, very apparent to the leaders of Britain. Now, there's also an oddity in this as well when you think about it. Britain has just come out of the Great War as a victor, unlike Russia or unlike Germany, and they're faced with these massive threats. So even with a victory, it's not leading to peace and goodwill at home or in the other parts of the empire. And it's not just in Ireland that the British government is faced with revolutionary upheaval. It's in Britain itself. There's mass unrest in all the big cities across Britain, and then there's military mutinies by British soldiers, and there are uprisings in India and Egypt and elsewhere. So the empire, in a sense, is becoming ungovernable. But in Ireland, it's a very the core of the empire. It's become very, very real, and the threat is great. So I think that the IRA war on the British state, I think, is well documented. I think its success, I think, is the number of people that joined, the volunteers, the thousands of people who were active in the military campaign. I think that's well understood. I think the aspect of the revolution, if we want to call this period now a revolutionary, that's blossomed in a sense into a revolutionary struggle. The aspect of mass mobilisation by the working class, I think, is often overlooked or dismissed. It's not just about, I'm going to talk about some of the instances, kind of like 10,000 people rallying for the Russian Revolution in Dublin, but because those I think instances and particular struggles capture a dynamic, but I think it's more that there is a sense across Ireland that it's not just British rule that's under threat, it's the whole way that society is constructed that's under threat. Because you've got working class people moving into rebellion, not just to say we want an independent Ireland, but also to say we don't think we should be exploited by landlords, by employers, or by big farmers, and that's at the centre of this radical rebellion. And I think it's in part then why it's written out of Irish history and semi-denied. One of the big mobilisations by the working class and labour movement is the 1918 strike against conscription. The number of people joining the army at this point has collapsed. It's even went down among Protestants in the north, from the northeast. And Lloyd George is under tremendous pressure to bring in conscription to Ireland. Now, they'd threatened to do this before. They'd threatened to do this before the Easter Rising. It was one of the reasons why Connolly believed, unlike many other people, that the conditions had ripened for revolution, which is why he was more confident about it than others. But in 1918, there's a threat to introduce conscription, and there is an all-out strike against conscription that actually is so effective that Lloyd George has to back off. And it then means that Ireland's one of the few countries in the empire where conscription is imposed. And I think that spoke to the capacity for people to shut down workplaces, to shut down the economy, and it speaks to the fact that this is not small numbers of guerrillas acting to end British rule, that there's a much wider rebellion going on. 1919, I think the Limerick Soviet, I think, is another fantastic example of the kind of working class radicalisation that's developed. Limerick was a city with a lot of creameries, that's what it was known for. The attempt to rescue a Republican prisoner had led to the death of the prisoner and a British soldier. And the British army then imposes martial law. And the response to this by the working class of Limerick is to basically go on strike, and the city becomes shut down. The workers set up a strike committee that ends up running the city, deciding what's allowed to move, when shops are allowed to be open. It organises production. It determines how things will be transported. And they called themselves a strike committee, and then called what they were doing a Soviet. They put up red flags all over the city and declared themselves in solidarity with the Russian Revolution, and that they were also enacting an Irish version of the worker Soviets that existed in Russia. So I think that this was not just limited to Limerick. I think this was happening elsewhere with like workplace occupations, land seizures by agricultural labourers, and I think again it describes the dynamic that's happening in Ireland. There's the 1919 general strike that erupts in Belfast, which is maybe obviously not the centre of the rebellion against British rule, because again it describes the challenge that the working class were presenting after the Great War to whether it was Liverpool, Glasgow, Belfast. Workers were demanding more. The pent-up anger from the war was breaking out into strike action, and that strike was led by shipyard and engineering workers. It involved both Catholic and Protestant workers, and you think about how significant that is in a very divided city where sectarianism had deeply scarred that city. And they set up a strike committee as well. Now the Belfast newsletter, again, maybe to some degree exaggerating the threat of revolution, they described it as this. One of the strikers' deputation boasted they had set up a workers' parliament. That is the language of the Bolshevists and Sinn Féiners, and it should open the eyes of the authorities, and also to the vast majority of men who are loyal and law-abiding to the real objectives of the strike. The objectives are not industrial but revolutionary, and if they were attained, it would be a disaster for the city. So that's Belfast, again, not viewed as like the centre of rebellion as Dublin might be, but again, I think it shows the level of unrest, mass unrest amongst working class people, and the potential for that to kind of develop in a revolutionary direction. British rule impossible in Ireland, whether it was workers, railway workers, and others refusing to move arms, refusing to move police officers across Ireland, and really shutting down the British war machine in Ireland. Trade union membership in these years explodes as well. For the IPGWU, it goes from something like 5,000 or 6,000 in 1916 to about 100,000 by 1920. So this is really I think that this is the heart of the Irish revolutionary process that was in development at that time, where you've got the combination really of armed struggle, workers' uprisings involving strikes, boycotts, mass actions, mass demonstrations, and so on. And I think that at a certain point the British government is beginning to realise that they have to figure out a plan B for holding on, for safeguarding as much of the empire's interests as possible. So I think that they have a three-pronged strategy that really leads to counter-revolution. One is pushing partition by 1920 and making it a fact on the ground, and I think that helped to demobilise the Irish Revolution. It was kind of cutting part of its project out from under its feet. A big part of it obviously was military repression by the British authorities to crush the rebellion and intimidate it into the ground. And then the third part of it was to find elements of the Republican leadership that they believed that they could do business with. Because at the end of the day, Britain might be willing to give up some territory in order to hold on to another part of the territory, but they didn't want a socialist Ireland next to Great Britain. And I think that was part of their part of the project about how to contain these revolutionary aspirations. And when I say revolutionary aspirations, I'm not saying that all these workers and people who were involved in these mass actions and seizures or occupations had a clearly worked out programme of revolution. Again, I think you have to think about how, when people are involved in struggles, how they can go beyond what they were prepared to do and how their ideas can actually change. I think that was true in the Russian Revolution. I think it was true across Europe. And I think it was very much there in the Irish Revolution as well, even if it didn't develop in that direction. I think that they're part of the challenge for the Irish working class revolutionary movement, if you want to call that. I think that the Republican leadership were seeing the threat of class war as a threat to the project of Irish liberation, because to achieve that you needed to unite the Irish people. So class war at the centre of a revolution threatened the Irish Republican project. So I think that Sinn Féin, or the Republican movement, or the leadership of the Republican movement, were determined to make sure that there wasn't a revolutionary process where workers and agricultural labourers ended up seizing power across Ireland. And I think that's a very important part in terms of understanding why we ended up in the end by 1923 with two conservative states where all trace of the revolutionary years appeared to be wiped out, and we ended up with two very pro-capitalist, religiously conservative states on either side of the border, where employers were very much in charge, and where law and order was reimposed violently through a civil war in the south and through pogroms in the north. And so, I guess to sum up, the main argument I would make is that often history leaves out the working class struggle or mass actions in the revolutionary years from, whether you want to start in 1916 up to 1923 or 1918 up to 1921, and that there was also different directions that the Irish revolutionary struggle could have went in, and that would have needed different ideas, different organisations that weren't there on the ground. But I think it's a fascinating period, and I think looking at Irish history, there's similar dynamics at play now across Ireland and across Europe and really across the world. I'll just stop there.